Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at EdgeTX Companion. If you're not familiar with it, EdgeTX Companion is simply a desktop software suite that works with your EdgeTX-based radio that allows you to do things like copy models and settings from the radio to your computer and back to your radio again. The cool part about Companion is that you can work on the computer instead of on the radio if you want to. Of course, you can work on the radio, that's no problem, but the thing that's nice about Companion is you get your desktop, you get a mouse and a keyboard. It certainly makes creating new model profiles and editing profiles that you already have much faster if you do it within Companion. So in this video, we're going to take a little tour. I'll show you how to download it, install it, set it up, and do a couple of the basic operations available within Companion to get you on your way. I'll have a link in the description where you can download Companion, so don't worry about trying to trap it during the video. But it is on the EdgeTX GitHub, and you simply scroll down to the bottom of the page, and you'll see a couple of different options there. One for Linux, one for Mac, and two for Windows, the 32-bit version and the 64-bit version. In my case, I'm using the 64-bit version of Windows, so I'll click on that and download it. And when that download's complete, I'll open the archive up and run the installer. Windows might complain about Companion because they don't know the Edge team as well as I do. That's okay. Click More Info and then Run anyway. Click the buttons you need to install the software and just let her rip. Once the software is installed, go ahead and run EdgeTX Companion 2.8. Now, as of this video, 2.8 is the latest copy of Companion, so that's the one we're running. If you watch this video at some point in the future, you may be looking at Companion 2.9 or 3.0. It's all going to be somewhat similar, so don't stress about it too much regarding the version number. Just grab the latest copy. The first thing we'll do is set up a radio profile. If this is the first time you've installed Companion, it will probably prompt you for that as soon as you run the software, but since I already had a radio profile on my computer, it saw it and used mine. But we'll take a look at the radio profile so you know what to expect. This little gear icon lets you get into the radio profile. For the profile name, you can choose any name that's meaningful to you. I chose TX16S Mark I because I'll be using my TX16S Mark I radio for Companion in this example. For the radio type, you want to make sure you choose the correct radio. There's a lot of options in Companion, including the Taranis X9D, all the way through the Jumper series and the Radio Master radios, of course. So make sure you pick the right one for your radio. It does matter because it goes to switch and hardware configurations. In my case, the Radio Master TX16S, that works for the Mark I and the Mark II. For the menu language, there's a couple of different options, including Czech, Dutch, German, French, Italian, Spanish. So pick the one that works the best for you. In my case, it's English. This options section is a little bit dated. It's more appropriate for OpenTX than EdgeTX. So you can really just skip these options. Don't worry about it. For SD structure path, now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of things. And what I'll tell you is that I create a folder on my computer somewhere. It can be anywhere. In my case, I have it on a network storage drive, but it can be anywhere you want. And the way I like to arrange mine is I make a folder called Companion. And then within the Companion folder, I make a folder called Backups, another one called Downloads, Screenshots, SD card, and Updates. And in the SD card folder, I like to drop off a copy of my SD card from the radio. And if you make an exact copy from your radio to your storage location on your computer, while you use Companion, Companion will have the same images and audio prompts that you have on your production radio. So just drop off a copy of your SD card from your radio in this folder. And then finally, I have a folder called Updates. You'll learn why all these folders matter as we go through the Companion configuration. The SD structure path points to the folder you just saw a moment ago, and you click the select folder button and navigate to where you're going to keep your SD card. In my case, it's a subfolder in my Companion folder. So remember, Companion is the main folder, and then within Companion, I click on SD card, and that's where I want Companion to look for SD card information. You could also point it directly to your radio. The reason I don't like to do that is because if you make any changes in Companion that you didn't mean to make on the radio, then those files are going to be changed on your radio. So I like to make my changes on the PC first, and that gives me a little bit of a fail-safe just in case I do something I didn't want to have show up on the radio. The next option is your default internal module. In my case, I have a Radio Master TX16S with a 4-in-1 multi-protocol module. So in my case, I use multi. If you have an Express LRS internal module, you'd want to select CRSF. Next up, select your default stick mode. In my case, I fly mode 2. And for default channel order, go ahead and use AETR. Now, I get questioned about this one all the time, and here's the simple answer. AETR only matters when you initially create a model. When you initially create a model, the radio will go ahead and enter your inputs and your mixes for you, and it'll place them in this order. That doesn't mean you can't fly TARE or TEAR or some other combo. You can. It's just the initial configuration that's placed on your radio when you create a new model will use this initial configuration of the default channel order. There are a couple of options to append and prompt. If you want to go ahead and turn those on for more information, that's fine. Go ahead. I leave mine unchecked. Under application settings, there's an option to specify how many recently opened files you want Companion to remember. If you click on File Open Recent, this number specifies how many of those file names show up in that list. Under startup settings, I leave everything unchecked. I don't really need to see a splash screen, and I don't need a Companion to prompt me for what radio profile I want to use. If you are using multiple radio profiles, you may want to turn this option on, and that way when you start Companion, it'll ask you to verify which radio you're connecting and working with. Under Action on New Model, this has to do with when you create a new model inside Companion. You have options for None, Wizard, Editor, Template, and Prompt. Pick the one that works best for you. I like to have it set on None. There is an option to remove empty model slots when deleting models. That's more appropriate for a black and white radio, not so much for the color screen radios running 2.8, because with 2.8 we have labels and the file list is auto-generated. For the backup folder, I have another subfolder in Companion called Backups, and I've used that. The splash screen library, again, is applicable to black and white radios, not relevant for color radios. We specify the splash screen with a splash.png in the images folder. There is an option to specify the Google Earth executable location. I have a feeling that has something to do with GPS location data, maybe out of log files, but personally I've never used it, so I really can't speak to it. If you ever have a need to work with the developers to sort out an issue with Companion, they may ask you to turn on some of this debug output logging. For generic setups, it's really not necessary. Next, under simulator settings, go ahead and specify a folder for screenshots. So if you capture a screenshot in the simulator, you can find them in this folder. You also have the option to say screenshots only get captured to the clipboard instead of written out to a file. Companion also has a cool option that allows you to use your radio as a joystick when you're using the simulator. In my case, I've got a FreeSky simulator dongle attached to my computer. No wires connected, so just the radio. And all I have to do is click on Calibrate. And as I move my sticks around, you can see the movement on the screen. So I've already done the work to get my radio talking to Companion, and this allows me to utilize the radio when I'm doing work inside the simulator. And then finally, in update settings, there are folder locations for downloads. These are downloads that allow you to pull firmware and SD card sounds and themes down from the internet and put them on your computer. So specify a folder for downloads. And then there's also a folder for updates, and this is where these updates will be stored when they're unpacked. And for components, put a check mark in each one of these boxes, set the release channel to releases, and what will happen is when you use the update function in Companion, it'll basically pull down an entire fresh install of EdgeTX, including Companion and all the SD card elements in a stock radio build, and it'll store it on your computer for you. Well, that covers setting up Companion. Now let's take a look at all the options you have when you're working inside Companion. The first button on the left is the new button, and when you click that, it creates an ETX document file. And in this document file, you can do things like add a model. When you double click that new model, you have the ability to edit the model settings right here on the computer. And this is what I referred to in the opening when I said Companion just makes working on your models easier. So for example, if I want to give this model a name, I can type Edge 540. And that's it. It's a lot easier to type that on a full-size keyboard than it is even on the excellent little on-screen keyboard for Edge or using a scroll wheel and scrolling through the letters. Just a lot easier to do on a full-size keyboard. And all of these tabs across the top basically line up almost identically to what you see on the radio. There are a few nuances. For example, in this Flight Modes tab, GVARs are configured here and they don't have their own GVAR tab. I kind of hope they update that at some point so that the tabs on this model editor line up exactly with what we have on the radio. I think they will at some point. We're just not there yet. You can also edit and manage your inputs, your mixes, your outputs, curves, logical switches. And if you're working on logic, this is a real easy place to do that. Because again, instead of scrolling through these items on a small screen with touch, even though touch is awesome, it's just a lot easier to do on a full-size screen with a mouse. You can also create special functions and even do telemetry simulation. And the last tab shows custom screens, including the theme you might be using and the different main views on your radio for that particular model. Up until now, what I've showed you how to do is create models and settings on your computer that you could later push to your radio. But what happens if you have things on your radio that you'd like to work with? Let me show you how to do that. Plug your USB cable into the top of the radio, and the radio should prompt you for joystick storage or serial. Since we're working in Companion, we want to select storage, and that'll mount the SD card on our computer. Once these two windows pop up, that means Companion should be able to see the content on your SD card. Make sure to close out the one that says firmware bin and firmware text. You don't want to be in there. And this shows the SD card structure that's on the radio itself. Notice the drive letter in my case is G. Yours might be a little bit different, but this is that folder structure you want to pay attention to. That means that the computer can now see your radio. I'll close the test file we were working in just a little while ago. We'll discard that. And now on the left-hand side, there's a little gold arrow. If you click on that, that'll read your models and settings from your radio into your computer. It's important to understand what you're seeing here. When you open one of these ETX files, be aware you're not just getting model files, you're also getting radio settings from whoever gave you the ETX file. These are the settings that are on my radio. So if I were to flash this on another radio, that radio is going to get all my settings, including my battery and screen and timer and audible prompts. It's going to get my global functions. It's going to get any trainer setup I have. It's going to get any names that I assign to my switches or knobs, and it's also going to get my calibration data. So you don't really just want to take an ETX file from somebody and flash it to your radio unless you want an exact copy of that radio. I would be happy to make another video showing you how to copy models from one ETX file to another. If you'd like to see something like that, leave a comment in this video and let me know. Now that I have my models read into Companion, I can double click on any of these models and go to work on it. I can change the name, I can change the image, I can change the timer information. Anything that I can change within the radio, I can now change within Companion right here on my desktop. Very convenient way to edit different settings and organize your model setups. In addition to changing model settings, you can also simulate a model right here on your desktop within Companion. Just click the simulate button down at the bottom, and that'll bring the model up in Companion in the simulator, and you can check out how your configuration is working. So for example, if I want to look at my channel monitor, I can click on model 2 times, and then I can move my sticks around and see how my configuration is working. Remember, these sticks are working with Companion because I have the radio bound to a simulator dongle that's talking to Companion. If you don't have a simulator dongle, you can also move stick positions on the screen with the mouse, and you can also change pots and switch positions. Remember, in EdgeTX 2.8, they introduced labels, so you have the ability to add, delete, rename, and move labels up and down, and you can also assign or remove labels to planes right here in Companion. So let's say, for example, this X8 Sky Surfer, let's say that's mistakenly labeled as an FPV plane. I can just come down into the labels section and remove the check mark from FPV, and you can see the Sky Surfer is now no longer assigned a label of FPV. And when I write that back to my radio, that label will be removed from that aircraft on the radio as well. If you click on this simulate button on the top of this document file, it'll bring up your radio in the simulator mode for the currently selected model. And don't forget, if you click the edit radio settings button, you can change radio settings. These are the ones that are normally found on the system side of the radio right here in Companion. When you're done editing your model and radio settings, it's very easy to send this information back to the radio. Simply click on the right models and settings button right here on the top left. When you're done, you'll see a prompt informing you that the write is complete. There we go. Now my models and settings are saved to the radio. Companion also offers the ability to read and write firmware to and from the radio. So if you want to take a copy of your stock firmware before you flash anything, that'd be a good idea, especially on a new radio. Just click on the icon that says read firmware from radio, pick a spot on your desktop you'd like to save it in, give it a name that you can remember, and hit save, and Companion will write that firmware right to your computer. You can also write firmware from Companion to the radio as well. Let's disconnect the USB cable and turn the radio off. And then we'll reconnect the USB cable, and that'll put it in DFU mode. So once we're in DFU mode, the 6-position light will stop right there on position number 1. And then we can click on the option to write firmware to radio, select the binary you want to use, in my case TX16S, and then click write to TX. And when you see this data scrolling across the screen, that means the firmware is being written to the radio. When Companion says the flashing is done, you can disconnect the USB cable from the radio and turn the radio back on. You should see your splash screen, and right back into EdgeTX we go. Perfect. The first couple of icons on the top left are for ETX document management. So if I click the open icon, that'll let me open prior ETX files. This white icon shows the most recently used ETX files in Companion, and this folder with the red arrow lets us save our current ETX files somewhere on our computer. So I'll just save this one under my Companion folder, and I'll just call this test. This red X closes our current file. This button with the airplane and the play icon lets us simulate the radio. The pencil allows us to edit our radio settings, and the next icon allows us to copy our radio settings. That brings us next to the log file feature. I like this one a lot. If you didn't know, the radio has a lot of capabilities in terms of logging. So if you use this feature in Companion, you can click on View Log File and then hit Open Log File, and I have a couple saved on my SD card. I'll just open that up and I can take a look at how different telemetry sensors have performed based on a recent flight on my airplane. This next button basically allows us to download Edge in its entirety. So when we click this button, we'll be presented with an option to pick the components we'd like to download, including multi-protocol, SD card, sounds, and themes. I kind of think it should be reading these values from the setup that we did earlier, but for some reason it's not. Anyway, if it's not, just put check marks into the components that you'd like to keep, make sure the channel is set to releases, and make sure your version is the most current version. So in this case, the most current version is 2.8. So I'll set all these options for 2.8. Multi-protocol, the latest option as of this video is 1.3320. So I'll check that. And then for SD card contents, we're looking at 2.8 for Flying Dutchman, and sounds also 2.8, and themes, the latest theme package. So once we've selected that, we can click OK, and it's going to download all of that information, the entire SD card contents file, the entire sound library. It's even going to prompt us for which voice we'd like to have in the sound library. In my case, I like the EN Emily option, so I'll click that. Not only does Companion download all the contents, it'll also unpack them and store them in your updates folder based on the settings that we went through earlier. Once the download and unpack is complete, you can close this window and then navigate over to your storage location on your hard drive and navigate to the updates folder. And in there, you'll see basically all of the software required for Edge. There's a firmware folder that will include the latest multi-protocol module binary and the latest EdgeTX binary for your radio. In the scripts directory, there'll be a tools folder that will include all of the standard Lua scripts available for a stock EdgeTX install, including DSM forward programming, Graupner Hot, the multi-channel updater, all multi-channel namer, the wizard loader, and so on. The sound pack that you chose will also be installed. This is Emily. And in the themes folder, every current theme available on the EdgeTX GitHub will also be downloaded and unpacked. So if you ever wanted to get all of the software for a complete EdgeTX install on a radio with one click of a button, this is a pretty easy way to do it. This gear icon opens up settings for Companion and the radio profile that we're in. We already covered this earlier, so I'm not going to go through that again. And then this button allows you to select which radio profile you're using. There are a few more options under this little double right arrow. If you click on that and click the little scale icon, that brings up a compare models window. So we'll drag the Edge 540 on there and then the X8 Sky Surfer, and that lets us take a look at two model configurations side by side. You can just scroll down and see how they compare to each other. And you can even print one if you want. The next icon allows us to synchronize the contents of our SD card with our computer. So pick a local folder where you want your SD card content stored, and then choose the radio folder. This is the one that's actually on your radio. This is the actual SD card contents on your radio. Make sure you have them both picked. Under sync direction, you have the ability to choose which way you synchronize. So the first option is both directions syncing to the radio folder first. The second option is both directions syncing to the local folder first. The next option really isn't a synchronization, it's more of a copy. This one specifies copying only from local to the radio, and the last option says let's copy only from the radio to the local folder. If you click this green plus, it'll add a model to your open document, and you can open that model and start editing. You also have the ability to edit, delete, cut, copy, export, and duplicate a model from this window. The icon on the far right allows you to check for updates. We kind of already did that, so no new updates at this time. And then finally, there's an icon that gives you a little bit of information about Companion. That wraps up my video on Companion. Hopefully you can see what a great tool it is when paired with an EdgeTX radio. If you like this kind of content, subscribe and hit the bell. That's all I've got for today. Take it easy and go fly something.